Well, this is really exciting for me because these men here and the gentleman that you see on the screen are just really some of my not only favorite men in Bitcoin, but just my favorite men. If I, if this was like our gang from the Little Rascals, I would want to be Darla, and I would want these guys to be our gang. So I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves, and I'm going to ask that you would, say who you are. And I think we'll probably start with Dr. Craig Wright, who's on the panel behind us here, since he hasn't been introduced yet. And then we'll just go down the line. You have a microphone there, and I'll ask Edmund Moy, and then Joseph Von Perling, and Trace Mayer, and then Nick Sabo to just introduce yourselves and say a little bit about how you came into Bitcoin for people that maybe don't know who you are and your relevance to the Bitcoin space. So, Dr. Wright, we're going to start with you. Welcome.
Okay. All right. I guess, first of all, I'm a former academic who these days does research commercially that no one ever hears about, which suits me very well. I basically work in designing protocols and doing a whole lot of things that people don't realize is actually possible yet. We'll be actually back to publishing papers again soon. I haven't been for a while. It's been a few years now, but I'll be going back to that next year.
But hold on a second. Who are you? What do you? No one here. Tell me who you are. Are you a computer scientist? Are you a miner?
I'm a bit of it.
You're a bit of
I'm
what?
a bit of everything. I'm a bit of everything. I have a master's in law from over here in Northumbria, in England. I have a master's in statistics, a couple doctorates. I forget actually what I've got these days.
That's a lot of certificates. And how did you first learn about Bitcoin?
I've been involved with all this for a long time. I mean, I try and stay. I keep my head down, but.
Were you a miner?
A long time ago.
A long time ago. Awesome. And right now you're in London. That's where you're talking to us from, right? Well, thank you so much.
Correct.
Thank you for joining us. And I'm going to then go to Edmund, if you don't mind. Thanks, Eddie, for coming.
Absolutely, Michelle.
Wait, let me see your socks.
Let's see.
You were supposed to wear white socks because you're in trouble, but okay.
I wore skull and crossbones for you, though. My name is Ed Moy. I had the honor and privilege of serving our country and you, because you're part of our country, as the Director of the United States Mint. And as such, I made our country circulating coins, our precious metal bullion coins, and collector's coins during that period of time. How I got involved in Bitcoin was when I got at the Mint, our strategic planning and analysis unit was non-existent. So I really ramped that up because I needed to figure out what the Mint's course was as electronic transactions were growing. And in 2009 was made aware in my briefings that a white paper had come out. In 2010, the first Bitcoins came out. And then I forgot about it completely until 2013 when Bitcoin kind of hit the public consciousness. And as a former Mint director, I was called left and right to do interviews on what I knew about the topic. And then I also just reflected back that I had heard about this first in 2009. So I view myself really as less of the Bitcoin community and more of mainstream, but I can serve as a bridge to take these ideas to the mainstream, whereas not many people in this ecosystem can do that. So,
should I just start, or do you want to ask me questions?
Well, no, you're going to tell us that you're Joseph Von Perling and you're how you got into Bitcoin and kind of what you're doing.
Okay, so Joseph Von Perling, that's my name, and I got into Bitcoin pretty early, right? I think with most of the folks in this room. Probably the reason I'm on this panel.
What's pretty early?
We can
2010, 11,
yeah, no,
12,
I'm not going to go
13.
into dates and all that, and not in this forum anyway. Probably the reason I'm on this panel, though, is my involvement with the Bitcoin Specie Project, which was an outgrowth of the New Liberty Dollar Project, which the Honorable Ed Moy had the notable distinction of causing the failure of this of the Liberty Dollar Project.
Woo! Here we go.
And sending a wonderful gentleman, an American hero, an American treasure, Bernard von Nothaus, into the poorhouse. Really, the government, due to a letter that came out over the Honorable Ed Moy's signature, caused a prosecution of this fellow and shut down the Liberty Dollar Project pretty much completely, and put this wonderful man in his 70s at risk of about 20-some years in federal penitentiary, and seized quite a number of tons of gold and silver, private minted, voluntarily exchanged coins. He would bristle if I called them coins, because that was a bone of contention in the case, right? But in fact, that's kind of what they are. And as an opportunity to one-upsmanship our wonderful former director of the U.S. Mint, I'm going to be giving out free samples to a few of my friends here. And this is a new Liberty Dollar. This is a project that I started after the Liberty Dollar was shut down, and I basically redesigned the piece so that it had none of the characteristics that were at issue from the government case, and began again. And from that, then also founded the Bitcoin Specie Project, which is a project to essentially create a peer-to-peer, anonymous, intrinsically valuable specie piece that has a QR code on the reverse side, which will give you the real-time value of it in Bitcoin. So if you're doing simple purchases over the counter, you don't have to wait for confirmations. You don't have to deal with any of the technical aspects of Bitcoin, and you can do it off the blockchain so that there's no blockchain pollution, which is now becoming an issue for block size, right?
Well, hold on a second. Let's give Trace a chance to introduce himself. And
yeah, I guess the rest of us, right? I'm Trace Mayer, early Bitcoin evangelist and investor in core infrastructure like BitPay, Armory, Kraken. I suppose relevant to this particular audience, I sent Jeff Berwick his first Bitcoins, Lou Rockwell, Tom Woods, Jeffrey Tucker, some of our favorites, right? How I suppose I got into Bitcoin, I was actually working on a graduate level academic paper on money, and interestingly enough, I couldn't find any real academic literature, which was strange. I suppose if you want to learn the truth about money, you have to learn it from yourself. And then I eventually ran into Dr. Edwin Vieira's book, Pieces of Eight, and he's got 4 degrees from Harvard, PhD in chemistry, law degree, practices before the U.S. Supreme Court. And his Pieces of Eight is the definitive treatise on monetary law in the United States. It's 1,700 pages, 5,500 footnotes, just expert, amazing book. And I actually got to talk to Dr. Vieira, and he's really quite a national treasure and a legend. But I guess relevant to what Mr. von Perling was talking about, I brought up the Liberty Dollar case to him, and he said, I actually had talked to Bernard von Nothaus, and I told him not to do this and that, and that's what they actually went after him for. And so, if you're going to want to do something in this space, you can't do very much from jail. So it's probably a good idea to listen to the lawyers and not do things that are intentionally provocative and make the state functionaries look stupid or impotent and powerless. So, otherwise they'll make an example of you like Mr. Albrecht.
Okay, my name is Nick Sabo, and I was involved helping come up with the ideas of smart contracts and blockchains and cryptocurrency in the
Can you get your mic? Sorry.
late 1990s. So, and of course, when Bitcoin came out in 2009, I saw it and got a little interested in it. So.
But you created BitGold, which is the precursor to Bitcoin, basically, right?
One of the precursors, yes.
Mm-hmm. And you were involved with Wei Dai and Hal Finney
yes.
a little bit, yep. So your computer science is basically what is the platform in a lot of ways to the Bitcoin protocol.
Right, yeah, that's the main skill set. Wei Dai and myself and Hal Finney applied computer science. And so, yeah, I have a computer science degree, University of Washington, also a law degree.
So I'm not intimidated up here at all with these guys. Okay, well, thank you all for coming, and I appreciate each of you being here. Maybe we can keep the focus on the history of money and the future of money and leave any disputes that we might have with people to talk about it at another time, please. Yeah. So we've had some really interesting conversations, but so how this panel kind of started was I saw a podcast that Trace did it was Reinvent Money at the time, wasn't it? Because they've changed the name of the podcast, and I really happen to like that one. And there were two things that you said and you repeated over and over again. You talked about monetary sovereignty, and you talked and you had this other term that I hadn't heard that I think you've used or coined or whatever is higher Bitcoin. So can you please just tell me a little bit about what you mean by higher Bitcoin?
Yeah, so whenever we want a particular job done or we're looking to provide some type of utility to ourselves, you're all sitting in chairs. Like, why did you hire a chair to sit right now instead of a couch? If we look at products as we're hiring them to do a particular job, we need to figure out, well, why are we hiring Bitcoin? Like, what job do we want it to do for us? And I think that the real solution that Bitcoin adds is because of its distributed nature, its censorship resistance, its immutable persistence, all of its ability to be transferred over a communications channel, all of those things give us a tool for monetary sovereignty. It gives us a way that individuals can hold the private keys to their own wealth. And that, I think, is a very empowering technology. It has an ability to change, like, fundamental economics of the system that we're in, and then as a consequence, we as a society have to reorganize how society we interact with each other. And so I think it's important for us to keep in mind, like, why are we hiring Bitcoin? I mean, do we really want it to make microtransactions and, like, free faucet-like transactions? Or do we really want to fundamentally change the world by having the private keys of wealth held by individuals and being able to transfer large amounts of money without having to go through central third parties? And so, we have all these different network effects that are taking place. If we keep our eye on the prize, like, what's the first reason we hire Bitcoin? And then, that takes priority over the second or the third or the fourth or the 10th reason for why we're hiring Bitcoin. Because Bitcoin can do so many things for so many different people, but, like, how do we prioritize what we should be focused on?
So, probably the biggest characteristic that distinguishes Bitcoin is its decentralized security, its integrity, its censorship resistance. And that makes it independent of financial institutions, which is the rest of the financial payments world is not. And it makes it globally seamless, so crossing cross borders seamlessly. So I would say those would be your highest priority, because those are the distinguishing factors that distinguish Bitcoin from Visa and the other traditional systems. Those would be your highest priority things in your list.
And Dr. Craig, the other day can you hear us, by the way, all of us okay?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay.
The other day I saw you tweet something, and I think it was Bitcoin is a commodity. Did you say that?
I said money is a commodity.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't exactly
Right.
sure if I remember that correctly. So can you elaborate on what you mean by that and how that relates to Bitcoin for you?
People argue about whether Bitcoin is a commodity or not. Now, it's quite simple, it is, but so is money. Throughout history, whether we're talking about gold or fiat itself, the value of exchange there is something that can have other uses. It's only recently that we've come into a unpegged currency that has no real relationship into anything. I mean, up until the 30s, we had a gold exchange standard, which most people don't even realize wasn't a gold standard. It involved less than 5% of the actual gold that was on the books in America was actually held. So there's always been a commoditization of money. And in fact, it is the ultimate commodity. It's the exchange protocol that we use for about everything else. So Bitcoin is a commodity for the simple fact that money is a commodity.
Okay, and so I think I tweeted something back to, I mean, no one knows me to be provocative or snarky, so, but as you said, there's been a discussion over whether or not it's a commodity or a currency, and that's primarily been for the purpose of taxation and such. And I think I said something to the effect of, oh, so it can therefore be taxed as a currency and a commodity, and you said neither. So how is it that you feel about, obviously it's a peer-to-peer currency and protocol that you don't want government involvement in?
A lot more than anything. I mean, that's looking at it too small. Obviously, unfortunately, not many people seem to have knowledge of assembly code or forth or anything like that anymore. And I listened to one of Nick's earlier talks, and he was talking about the limitations. But in machine code, there's none of these limitations. And in fact, we have a rather rich instruction set in Bitcoin. It's just not well defined yet. And then the next part is we have the Ethereum going out there saying we need to build a new stack because we can't loop. But no one seems to realize that Forth actually does loop. You have to use a separate control stack. It's not like a lot of code forms where you actually have a single stack. Forth and Forth-like languages use a dual stack architecture. So everything that we're talking about in derived contracts can actually be done directly in Bitcoin and the Bitcoin protocol. It's just going to take time for people to understand it.
Since you mentioned Nick, then I'm going to allow him to respond to that. You need your microphone though, sweet, or the water.
No, I have not heard that opinion before. I've never heard anybody call the Bitcoin script Turing complete, and I don't believe that's accurate.
He just said you're wrong.
The difference is the script itself isn't. What you can do is you have in Forth a control loop. So the looping function is separate to the actual loop, the script itself.
Yeah, I mean that's an esoteric thing. If it's not Turing complete, then it's not a general purpose language like Ethereum, regardless of
But that would
that
assume
partial
that the only way of actually
type of
writing code would be to do it directly in a script that runs on the machine.
Okay, so do you have another option?
Well, this would be a good topic for you to write a paper on because that's certainly an unconventional view you have. So.
And Joseph, did you want to comment to that as well, since you're a computer scientist?
Since you're talking about Twitter and additional opcodes, this is something that Garzik commented on, I believe,
Jeff Garzik?
A day or two ago, saying that a new opcode could be possibly done that would allow Turing complete to be done within Bitcoin.
I'm sorry, would you please a little bit louder and realize that I don't understand jargon at all, and
Okay.
so, talk like we're talking
So
to me
a
here.
new
Make
script
it simple.
function that doesn't exist yet, a new opcode, could be implemented that would allow calls to a Turing complete language, Ethereum or not.
Did you hear that, Dr. Craig?
No, I didn't, sorry.
Okay, so Garzik on Twitter within the last couple of days mentioned another Turing complete language that could be implemented as a new opcode to make calls to and implement Turing complete functions within the Bitcoin script. So it doesn't exist today. Mm-hmm. It is a possible future. Who knows if it will occur? But both of these gentlemen are correct.
Wow. Okay. Now, so here we've immediately gone to talking about computer science and code and what have you, and and it's money. And so, to start with you, Eddie. Yeah. So you are the eldest, the most mature of us up here, and have
which means old, but not necessarily smarter.
So what do you think about this? Because when I first met you, we both had I had a silver piece in my pocket, and which was actually given to me by the gentleman who owns Roberts and Roberts, and it's right here actually. And you pulled out your gold 1 ounce coin and upped me quite considerably. So what do you think, what is it, because we're talking so much toward like millennials and future generations and things. So your family came over from China, as I recall, and basically tied gold coins into your clothes, or their clothes, so that they could, and they had to carry their wealth with them. And so what is your kind of your visceral reaction to this digital space relative compared to how you grew up thinking about it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in short, as Michelle mentioned, my family, Chinese, my dad came over after the Communist Revolution, then went back to Hong Kong to find a wife, and then they both came over here. My parents saw World War II, the rise and fall of the old imperial government, the rise and fall of the warlords, the rise and fall of the nationalists, and the rise of the communists before they hightailed it out. And during that time, they saw 3 failures of the banking system, 2 collapses of the currency. And so if you grow up in a mentality like that, you realize that government-made currency and systems can fail you. And as a result, you need backups. And for my parents, gold was a backup. And so in India and in China, where these things have happened a lot, there's a cultural preference toward diversifying your wealth into tangible assets, and gold just happens to be very portable. And so with that, when the Japanese, so when my mom got married, she got a 24-karat gold bracelet and 24-karat gold necklace, which is unusual because they're usually 14 or 18. And around them were $2.50 and $5 gold pieces. And what her father-in-law was telling her wasn't, "I love you as my daughter-in-law," but he was saying, keeping the family line going is so important. I want to make sure that if an all-out war happens and you have to run away from your home, you have enough money around your neck and your wrist that you can sustain our family through the worst crisis and find your way to safety. And so we grew up with that mentality, and that's one of the reasons why I gravitate toward Bitcoin today is while gold has been portable for 2,700 years or arguably 5,100 years, because of today's economy and the modern prices of things, carrying enough wealth around your neck is very difficult using gold. And so I look at Bitcoin as being a substitution for that, which holds a lot of the same characteristics that people had valued in gold over history. It's not a one-to-one comparison, but there are a lot of similarities, and it's the best modern thing that comes close to holding its value that way.
So this is something that we were talking about last night at dinner. It frustrates me that when we talk about the value of Bitcoin, that we talk about it in terms of against USD. And I understand that's reserve currency and what have you, but I would be interested actually in valuing it against gold. To me, that'd be like comparing apples to apples as opposed to apples to a millstone that is going to drown us, So how would you, what would you think of that?
Yeah, so I think there are some advantages of tying a cryptocurrency in some way to a tangible asset like gold, but I also think that there's some challenges with that too. Overall, the other reason why I like cryptocurrencies and where my mind has gone on all this is that when you take a look at our earliest notions of money, money was in private hands. You found electrum, which was basically a mixture of gold and silver in the ground. Sizes were important, and if you just pounded it into a mold and you used that in trade. So money was it was in private hands. It was the ultimate democratization of money. But that limited economic growth because you had this issue of standards, weights, measures, so that electrum, when you find it in the ground, it could be 90% gold and 10% silver, 92%, 94%. You wouldn't know. You might get the weight right, but if you didn't get the purity right, you had a problem. And then as commerce got bigger and bigger and transactions got bigger and bigger, you needed more coins, and you couldn't rely on the technology would not allow the private sector to keep up with demand. And so government stepped in, and the big step was in Lydia, where they figured out how to purify gold. And once they purified gold, you already had weights and measures down, and all of a sudden things started clicking. Well, I see Bitcoin as the improvement in technology that allows money to be privatized again, back where it should be, because it's my belief that one of the main uses of money is economic transactions. Why is government involved in economic transactions? Except
Hallelujah.
For the ability to tax, except the ability to tax that transaction and get their income out of it. And so if money is primarily used in economic transactions between two people, then it makes a lot of sense to me that if current technology allows, then money should be privatized because it's used between two people.
Okay, and who was the speaker yesterday? Oh, Chris Odom. Chris, are you somewhere around here? Oh. Anyway, so I think he's somewhere. I can't see him. But anyway, so he said something yesterday that I really appreciated. I get so feisty and so fired up because of all the oppression that's going on with the government in terms of Bitcoin and in terms of our money. And to me, having ownership of your property is directly key to being human and exercising your humanity. So he was so great to remind us that the cat's out of the bag. All right. So it's whether or not the state and government can actually keep up. So what do you think, Trace, in terms of, because you actually have businesses that are viable within this space, and so you know more about that.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the reasons I seed funded Armory was I wanted people to have the ability and the power to hold the private keys of their own wealth. I think that's a very important thing to do ideologically. I think also, we look back over history's long journey from the swamps to the stars, and there are a couple key figures in history. There's Isaac Newton, developed the gold standard. There was Christopher Columbus, just driven by something to eventually he unlocked the key to this new land by discovering the trade winds. It made it economically possible to build out this new country. And the way that the American map was set up, we really only had to terraform the Erie Canal. Otherwise, we had the Mississippi River, we had the Great Lakes. It wasn't distributed like Europe was. And all of that wealth that got created from building out this new land, it flowed through Manhattan and then to the rest of the world. And so when we look at what Satoshi's done, we had asymmetric cryptography, and we started tinkering around the edges of this new vast frontier called cyberspace, but we hadn't discovered the trade winds yet. And so what Satoshi's done is he's found this way to be able to economically build out cyberspace, because we've now reduced the function of transferring value over a communications channel to pure data. And I think that's a very, very significant discovery in technological innovation. Maybe Nick would like to talk a little bit more about that, since you've been involved in this far longer than I've probably been alive.
So, if Nick could comment, and then as soon as Nick's finished, if we could just go right to you, Dr. Craig, and comment on the same thing, that'd be great, okay?
So, I think that comment is correct. The decentralized security of Bitcoin allows it to replace an army of lawyers and accountants and investigators that would be involved in a PayPal and a Visa and the more traditional payment systems. And as for gold, of course, is the big inspiration for BitGold. If you look at the history of gold, it's been very useful. For example, smuggling money out of the country past capital controls. However, it's also been quite insecure at times. The Spanish looted the Aztecs, and the English looted the Spanish. So gold, and of course FDR confiscated gold, and in modern times that smuggling can be harder because of X-ray machines and other metal detector machines. So that was a big challenge, is to use computer science to improve on that, to have the economic and security characteristics of gold insofar as independence from financial institutions goes, but also have it be transmittable digitally and be more secure than gold.
And Dr. Craig, did you want to say something about that?
I think everyone continues to think too small. I mean, the homomorphic properties of ECC basically mean that we can exchange a cryptographic key, a symmetric key, and encrypt documents, load those, store them as a function that we can relate to on the blockchain itself. But more than that, we can actually link it into things like IPsec, and we can build firewall policies that are transmitted because of purchasing a token. And by tokenizing all these things, by tokenizing access, we can then take our access via the blockchain, shared keys, and because the nature of ECC, we can actually have your public key by my secret key equals the value under point multiplication, point addition of the opposite. So my public key by your secret key, we can take a hash of that, use a deterministic function, and then we can actually find a shared hash that we can both recalculate. So if we're talking about things like access to websites, digital rights management, we have all that capability actually there. So the majority, we're still thinking it's just money. There's so much more.
So can you tell me, because you've now moved your operation, your family, and your business and everything from Australia to London, and I saw that you were doing some things in Iceland and things. So why did you do that? And I assume that it's for the purpose of the advantages to Bitcoin. Sorry, we just kind of lost some color there. Okay.
Iceland's because of power. It's much, much cheaper in Iceland to run computers. And the main one that we've got at the moment is called Tulip. And Tulip's number 15 in the top 500 supercomputers globally. So
your computer is named Tulip? Is that what you said?
Tulip.
Okay.
Yeah, we call it Tulip. Most people don't actually realize that the tulip bubble wasn't really a bubble. It was actually a reallocation of contracts. It was made from a contract to a swaption. And by changing the contract to a swaption effectively and allowing government officials to get out of their contract, they collapsed the price. Now, tulips actually did have a use back then. Tulips kill grass, and one of the things that they were done they would be planted around castles to basically keep the grass down and trees down and everything like that because they're toxic. And when you had a castle back then, you wanted a large area to see things. So there was actually quite a value in tulips because they sold billions of them around Europe. They're one of the biggest trade areas. It wasn't just a special tulip. It was actually, the volumes were huge. It was bigger than coffee now.
And what are you doing with this computer? You said it's in the top 15 largest supercomputers in the world, you said?
It's number 15 at the moment, yes.
Number 15. And what is being done with that?
We've been modeling Bitcoin scalability and everything like that for a number of years now.
Wow, that's cool. And
I'll be releasing papers next year.
And did you want to comment? I know, Eddie, that you, with your history of money, I haven't heard anyone say before that tulip mania wasn't actually a bubble. Did you want to comment?
So I'm a recovering government bureaucrat, so I'll refrain from commenting on things that I know nothing about.
Oh, wow. Good for you. I'm so impressed. I'm so proud of you. So now, can you tell me what you're doing, Nick, with we talked a little bit about how you got into the space and what you think about it, but or what you're doing right now to push forward with Bitcoin or cryptocurrency now?
Right. So, working on putting conventional assets on the blockchain. Now, right now, this is done with colored coins, which trust minimizes the transfer of ownership. However, that does not do anything for the cash flows. You're still fully trusting in a kind of Mt. Gox style in your typical Bitcoin setup. And so what we're working on, Donald McIntyre and I, is trust minimizing the cash flows off the blockchain.
Okay. So I know that I don't know if there are any people who'd like to ask questions, but I want to be respectful of the time and everything so that I can budget the rest. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask? Or you do.
Okay, this is Stephen Michaels, and I'd like to address this question starting with Dr. Wright, and then maybe just go down the panel. So I'd like to hear each panelist's response. And it's a twofold question. The first question is a quick commentary on the short history of Bitcoin thus far as how it's been able to overcome its challenges. And I recognize it still has challenges. So just a quick commentary on the history. But then also if you can share your view, and I know some of you have commented on this already, but if you could share your view on the future of Bitcoin as you see it, where you see the greatest opportunities, the greatest challenges, and where maybe we as an audience or users or owners of Bitcoin, how we can help push that forward to really help develop its full potential.
Did you hear the question, Craig? I'm going to start here, but did you hear it?
I heard it, yes.
Okay, so go ahead.
So, right, basically, where people are going wrong is they're separating transactions. CoinJoin is used commonly for anonymizing things, but there's no reason why you can't have both sides of the transaction. So in an exchange, where we're doing a redeemable collapsible contract built into the actual transaction, what we should be doing is having multiple layers. It should be, I'm transferring something to you, but you're transferring to me in a single transaction. And the technology, it's nothing new. This is actually part of the original 0.1.0 protocol without any changes. So we have to start thinking differently about how we're doing it. What we need to do is have an integrated approach. We need to start using the technology the way it's really meant to and stop thinking about how we used to do it. You don't hand me something, I hand you something. We both do it simultaneously. That's the beauty of this.
And Nick?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of potential smart contract applications in Bitcoin and Ethereum, and in putting Ethereum as a sidechain, Sergio Lerner's project, Rootstock, and potentially also new opcodes in Bitcoin as well. So, yes, I agree that smart contracts are huge.
What do you think the challenges that we're facing right now are in Bitcoin?
So, the last mile challenge for cross-border payments, it's very easy to get across borders, but getting the last mile back to the local currency tends to add most of your costs of the original transaction back. So that is a challenge. And but the biggest opportunity I think will continue to be cross-border applications, payments themselves, smart contracts, and other financial assets on the blockchain.
I'd say that our biggest challenge is probably that we're working on too many science projects and not focused enough on the business. At the end of the day, freedom, privacy, all of these things, I think that they're going to become increasingly luxury goods that you have to be able to afford, and you won't just be able to free ride off of other people and what they're provided in those senses, whether it's the founding fathers with the Constitution or other stuff. So having that monetary sovereignty and that financial independence will give you the ability and the power to then purchase or acquire the privacy or the freedom or the other aspects that you might want in your life. And if you're not able to afford it, then you're just not going to be able to enjoy a life that has something like that. And so I think it's very important that we have the financial acumen and apply it to actually be able to acquire these things. Just kind of is what it is.
It is what it is, indeed.
That sounds so ominous. Okay.
Thanks. To speak up, right. So the question was about what's the next steps, what's the future, how do we unlock what Bitcoin can do. There are many next steps, and we've touched on a few of them just now, but the far distant future, I think, here in Bitcoin land is that it unlocks the elements that were set forth by the cypherpunks in the manifesto. It begins the process of outsourcing all of the things that we once looked to government and still look to government to provide, and provide them in code and mathematics so that we can ultimately reduce the cost and the impact of government on the lives of everybody and increase thereby the liberty of every human on the planet. It has the potential to unlock happiness, freedom, liberty, and independence in a way that no other technology in our lifetimes has begun. And we are just now at the very beginning of it. So everyone here, you are the pioneers. You're the people in the building the log cabins and crossing the wastelands and sailing on the trade winds and creating new businesses and taking us step by step into the future that we're trying to create. And we thank you for that.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike Dupree.
So I'm going to maybe offer an alternative opinion here. A lot of what we've been discussing has been challenging for me, interesting. I've learned a lot being with you. But when you talk about the challenges of Bitcoin, ultimately being a free market person, Bitcoin will rise when the utility of Bitcoin exceeds that of its alternatives. Bottom line. As what Trace was talking about, why would you hire Bitcoin? And the issue, the biggest challenge I see with Bitcoin right now is in developed countries where all of us come from, there are a lot of alternatives to the services that Bitcoin can help expedite and make better. And the greatest need for Bitcoin and where it's being adopted at a much faster rate is in other countries where they have major problems where they don't have alternatives. So in Venezuela, when your currency is crashing, people are escaping to Bitcoin. In Greece, when their debt problem is killing their country and they implement capital controls, Bitcoin is thriving. When you look at African countries or countries that are too small to have their own physical currency, so there's about 90 mints in the world, 90 sovereign mints. There's 175 countries or 187 countries out there. Well, why don't these countries have their own mints? Mints are based on economies of scale, and so you have to have a lot of scale in order to make that mint work. And so when you don't, you subcontract out to a larger mint to make it for you, and that's a very expensive process. Or if you're in a very difficult climate, like a sub-Saharan nation where it is hot and humid, that currency, its velocity might only last a month versus 14 months for the U.S. dollar. And so we might be focused on a very high esoteric level, and that's because we have the luxury of doing it, being in a developed country. But where the challenge is going to be is, I believe, how do you bring this to countries that really need it in a way that they can understand it and incorporate it and hire it to solve their problems. And we're not doing that jawboning in this room.
So if no one else has any other questions, I know that Stephen does here. So, do you mind? Let's go ahead. Hi, would you go ahead and come on up here? And yeah. Can you say who you are and why you're here? No, not into the microphone. Why you're here, and also what your question is.
Oh, okay. My name is Julian Tosh. I kind of push Bitcoins here in Las Vegas. I had a question for Dr. Wright. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. You said you have a 15th largest supercomputer modeling Bitcoin. I would like to hear more about that. If I heard that incorrectly, then let me know too.
No, it's called Tulip. If you have a look in the top 500 site, where site number 5547, it's my second computer. Well, the first one was called Coin. And we're now building our new one, which will be in Iceland, which will even be bigger. If we do it right, we'll hopefully edge over the NSA this time. We were 3% lower in power than the NSA.
3% what?
Yes, 3% lower in power than the NSA.
Wow.
Not bad for I think we're the only private supercomputer in the top 100.
Congratulations. Right on. So Stephen's going to ask another question.
First of all, congratulations on having that distinction to be able to say that. You've been tweeting recently about property, the nature of property rights, and so I'd like to maybe ask you to elaborate a little bit on that, maybe how Bitcoin plays a role in that, Dr. Wright, and then we'll go through the panel again, and I'd like to hear each one of them comment on that.
Did you hear the question?
Right. I did. One of the most fundamental rights as being human is the ability to own and trade property. The thing is, every other thing that we do, other than trade, is done by animals or plants or combinations of the above. There are tool-building animals. There are all sorts of things. What we do that is really unique is we trade. And to do that fairly means property. We need to be able to control our own freedoms. And the only way to do that is to basically have the right to property, to ownership, to transfer, to decide what we want to do. And that also means not telling people what we have. If we don't want to go out there and say, I'm a billionaire, or I'm running XYZ, or this is my life, I shouldn't have to tell people that. I should have the right to live frugally if I want to and invest in business without telling people that I'm a billionaire or that I'm a whatever, like some people have to these days, like governments try and make us. We should be able to choose how we live. And that's the fundamental right of property. And that means being able to dispose of property as we want, to be able to share it, to take it. And that's what it's all about. Once we get things where we have redeemable contracts, and we link them to the blockchain, where we can link money and goods, digital rights, ownership into something that can't be changed, a fundamental, open, honest, truthful asset, the blockchain. That's when we're going to see real freedom in the world.
Thank you for that. And then go ahead, Nick, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I agree with that. Secure property titles 1998 was the first version of that, and colored coins today allowing transfer of ownership. And that can apply, as the name implies, to all kinds of assets and property, not just Bitcoin itself. And the other interesting thing that I looked at quite a bit is integrating digitally controlled property into the blockchain, so that digitally controlled property knows who owns it. You can look on the blockchain and see who owns it, and it is securely programmed to guide its function accordingly.
Yeah, I think the whole issue of property is a very interesting one. It raises lots of different questions. You know, Dr. David Bohm, who was at Princeton with Einstein, and Dr. Pribram, who's a neurophysiologist, had a theory about a holographic theory of the universe. And so I don't think we really understand how the universe even functions right now. And with blockchain technology specifically, it's very interesting that we're laying down new thought patterns that are cryptographically provable. Like, did Abraham Lincoln exist? You know, when we're thinking about our past, like, how can you prove it? And yet, you know, now the level of evidence that we're going to be able to have centuries in the future, we're going to be able to have videos and pictures, and they're going to be able to be hashed, and so we're going to have a much more solid, cryptographically, mathematically provable history or thought pattern that gets laid down much more solid. And so when we're looking at property rights and things like that, you know, when a government collapses or fails, like, those property rights can just evaporate instantaneously. And so we're going to have much more tangible property rights that are laid down through cryptographic and mathematical law, as opposed to just the laws of men. And that's going to give us a much more solid history of who owns what and how it's been transferred and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole question of who owns what, it's stored in ledgers, and Bitcoin is the best ledger that's come across yet. And it's not just the what, right? Not just what color coins can do as far as identifying different types of things. It's also the who. You can, I mean, this great project Open Bazaar is just launching imminently, and you know, it incorporates an idea of fidelity bonds where you can create an identity by sending Bitcoin to an unspendable address, and that then creates an identity of trustability that you don't want to lose, because those Bitcoins are gone, and if you break the trust that's associated with them, they're gone, and that trust is no longer trustworthy. So the whole notion of who owns what is potentially changing. Currently, we all rely on government ledgers for who owns what real estate, who owns what car. You have to register all of these things. All of this is expensive. All of this requires people to pay taxes by force. All of that is potentially reducible in cost and impact on our lives, and it's, again, all because of this wonderful new technology that we're only just now beginning to unlock the benefits of.
And and so I have a question actually after this, and then you'll give your last few words. But I know, Edmund, that you received a tax bill that you weren't very happy about that came as a result of you owning stocks in something or another. And I don't want to speak for you, and I don't want to out whatever. But I mean, that came as quite a surprise, and it caused you to have to make some major lifestyle changes and things like that. And that was relevant to property. So do you have some comments that you'd like to make in regard to property, but also speak personally about the loss of yours?
All right. So the first comment about property, I agree with everything that's been said here. I believe it's a fundamental to what makes us distinctive as human, and which is why I have a hugely negative bias toward communist and socialist governments, and in particular a personal relationship or personal experience with that, where my father grew up as part of the wealthy landowner class, and unlike the bourgeoisie in Russia, it was the landowners that Mao went against in order to form his communist government. So my family went from being extremely wealthy to zero in a day in 1949 and escaped China with their lives. And so just that own personal experience that I have shows how quickly things can change, even in relatively modern history. And so I believe things like Bitcoin, which allow for greater ease of keeping that personal property yours and away from government confiscation, could be one of the single greatest tools to reforming these centralized governments all over the world. And so it's one thing to preach democracy, and we saw that in the 80s with Reagan and Thatcher and Pope John Paul II, and how greater democracy and greater economic growth happened during that period of time. And I believe that the technology of Bitcoin is going to be integral to the next movement of freedom, because it has to work hand in hand, private property as well as liberty together. Sorry, a question?
Could you actually come up and use the microphone so that the video can pick it up?
And 2 cheers for someone else wearing a suit here and a tie. So, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I'm right on board with everyone on the panel here about the importance of property rights. My question really goes back to, I guess, the kind of cynical comment that in the future these inalienable human rights that we sort of take for granted will really come down to whoever can afford them. I guess I feel like I might get some disparate opinions here, but especially for the Honorable Ed Moy, is there a role for government in Bitcoin? Is there a role for taxation in Bitcoin? Because it seems like those are two kind of fundamentally opposed ideas. And yeah, I'd leave that question there and would love to hear the panel's thoughts.
Thank you. So did you heard the question, Dr. Wright? Okay. Okay.
I did.
So
At
want
the
to
end of the day, if taxation is going to occur, it needs to be done in a way that is actually more to do with what people spend. So, I mean, if you have a value-added tax but no income tax or whatever else, then it's enforceable. In the future, when we have pseudonymous systems, the government's going to have to actually look at what's being spent by business and what can be claimed. And basically, they can tax me on the things I'm able to use and produce with to a limit, but only to a limit.
Okay.
Yeah, it's there's an arms race between anonymizing technology and tax collection on the blockchain, so that will be interesting to see develop. Because a fully non-anonymous, fully identified set of transactions on the blockchain is a perfect auditor's tool, including tax auditors. So, yeah.
I mean, it really just comes down to the degree of society that the populace will tolerate. You know, and as we see in Venezuela, they'll tolerate a pretty bad society. And regarding the other stuff, you know, we have a lot of advancements being made in life extension, biotechnology, nanotechnology, things of that nature. And that's kind of how the resources get distributed and allocated. And unfortunately, I think that particularly, like if you go look at one of the 2009 Nobel Prizes in biology that has to do with telomerase, I think that technology could actually be used to reduce lifespan to a commodity that could then be rationed. And so, and then once that happens, it can then become an additional choke point of power. And so, you know, it's and that's how people that have these nightmarish tendencies, they seek towards the power centers so that they can work out their nightmares on everybody else. And so, as long as we as a society tolerate power structures of a sufficient size, then we'll continue to have the nightmares. Otherwise we're going to hopefully get over it. But I don't know. We got 7 billion people that are all contributing to the way that we organize society. And so we really have to fundamentally change the economics if we're going to change the way everything's organized on top of it.
Now because we need to start wrapping things up, but I do want to ask the 3 computer scientists this question. There's been a lot of talk lately by the bankers that they want the blockchain, but they don't need Bitcoin. So can you please touch on that and address whether or not we can even have the blockchain without Bitcoin, and keep it really simple for people like me?
So private blockchains, the architectures tend to be actually similar to the original BitGold and secure property titles insofar as using Byzantine consensus, where you have a set of countable, identified nodes. And that can work reasonably well if you're in a bank and you're kind of a comfy environment where you have a public key infrastructure and you can identify the other nodes in the bank. That does not work for your cross-border applications for seamlessly distributed system. So the bank private blockchains tend to be used for improving on internal efficiencies within the bank rather than the cross-border applications that Bitcoin and et cetera are good for.
What do you think about that, Joseph?
Well, banks have a lot of things that they're misguided about. One of them may be the applicability of blockchains to the environment. And banks use journaling database. Bitcoin blockchain is an example of a journaling database. It's write only. Once you've written to it, you can't change it. The ATM networks use a similar type of database structure. The idea of it is that once the transaction is done, it gets propagated to all the others, and you can't duplicate it, and you can't change it. You can't undo it. But the wonderful solution of the Byzantine fault tolerance and all that, it's a bit wasted on banking architecture in general. So the banks may employ it. It may be good for them, but they're certainly not getting all the wonderful benefits that it provides. And to bridge into the other question about how this affects government and banking, it was mentioned in one of the previous talks, there's a very, very fine line between government and banking, and what Bitcoin really does is it takes that fine line and makes it a bit wider. Because of its wonderful auditability, you've seen government officials that have done crimes with Bitcoin go to jail. And it's a permanent record, and that's why banks like it. You remember in your grade school, your teacher would say, "This is going on your permanent record." You knew it wasn't true. With Bitcoin, it's true, right? It's there forever. So the dividing line between banking and government may widen because of this. And I think there will come a time where the separation between the honest politician and the dishonest one will come down to whether or not they support the use of Bitcoin for government function. Because it does provide that auditability, and the anti-corruption tools that it can implement throughout government can make government become provably honest in a way that's never before been possible. And a provably honest government is something we've never seen. It would be a wonderful thing to see. I would
question whether or not it's possible, but anyway.
Well, with the cryptography, I would suggest that it is possible. Whether or not
that would imply, though, that people are always honest in the first place. So,
well, those that are can then prove it, right? And the ones that aren't can't. So that it may create that division between the people within government that become more electable because they can prove the degree to which they are honest, versus those who are competing for their office.
Okay, and Craig, if you would please tell me your thoughts, and then if you would give any last closing words, and then we'll just go down the panel one at a time so that we can get on to the next speaker. That would be great.
At the end of the day, Bitcoin is a limited supply. So we have to go back to economics rather than computer science in this one and remember that we incentivize people to get them to act. Now, banks seem to forget that anything with a limited supply that is of use is going to start having value. If people then have value in something, they will speculate on it. So at the end of the day, saying that there is no value in Bitcoin or whatever else is superfluous because people will act anyway in their own interest. Now, incentivizing all of this and using a way to get people to actually want to engage means that you have a system where people are going to make the system more secure, not because they want the system to be more secure, but because they act on their own interest. And that's where the banks are going wrong. At the end of the day, there isn't a bank out there in the world that has enough computing power to stop me personally now if they were to run a Ripple network or their own private blockchain. I mean, I've got a 3-point-whatever petaflop computer sitting there grinding away, and if an individual, well, not a small group, can basically set up something, then others can, governments can. And if the government really wanted to compete with me and chuck more money into supercomputing research, they would build something way bigger that could attack any system. And if we think about competing currencies and banks, then in time, if we're going to rely on private blockchains, we're going to find that we have a system that is less secure, not more.
And thank you. And then can you please just give any last words that you'd like to, any wisdom you'd like to impart or anything?
I think what we're limiting ourselves in thinking about Bitcoin as just money or as just transactional exchanges. It is so much more. If we think about the crypto, we think about the technology, we can integrate that. Instead of PKI, we can have a browser-based certificate that doesn't require certificate revocation lists for the simple fact that every transaction, every time we log on, is new. It can be tokenized. It can be paid for. We can have a system where every time you download a file, every time you access something, it's encrypted and it's owned by you, where you can share it, where you can actually have a record. We have to start thinking not just money, but a full digital rights network, a full transaction network for files that link to redeemable contracts. Then we'll start actually understanding what this is really about.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay.
Any last words, Eddie?
Yes. So just a few last words. Point number one is I wanted to address your issue. And, as far as the government role in the development of Bitcoin. So I would separate it, and I won't address what I wish for. I'll address the reality. And the reality is government is not monolithic. It's very inefficient. But there's one thing that it does better than anybody else in private or public sector, and that is collect money. That is the one single thing they're really good at and very jealous about.
What about the roads? Just jokes.
And so under that scenario, Bitcoin development in the United States is, with government approval, is somehow going to incorporate how do we get money out of that transaction. And so I just think that's the reality that we operate under. And then the last comment I wanted to make is a clarification of what I was saying before, and that is I really do think that we in the West have an important contribution to Bitcoin because this is where all the intellectual capital is and the innovation going on. So that's an extremely important role. But the application of Bitcoin, I think, is really going to grow in the developing world. And so I think until we can bridge that disconnect, Bitcoin's adoption and development is going to be stunted.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I also want to thank the crowd of people assembled here and all the people who may see this at some point in video for your attention and your efforts, and would like to challenge each of you personally to look at your life and visualize what is possible that you can do to make some of the things that we're talking about here today come to pass. You can do more than you think you can if you only try.
Yeah, I really like Steve Jobs, and he said one of the things he realized was, if I put my finger in here, I'm going to affect the universe over there. And he's like, I can actually make a difference. And boy, did he make a difference, right? And Dr. Vieira, he said, the fight over gold and silver are not merely commodities, but they're essential checks and balances in the political machinery. Thus, the fight over gold and silver isn't about money or just making money, but it's about whether individuals will control their own lives or whether their lives will be controlled by the elites. And, that's really what I think we need to keep the eye on the prize, because we need monetary sovereignty. And now, more than ever, there's actually a market demand for monetary sovereignty. Freedom is becoming increasingly profitable. So if you can find a way to sell freedom as opposed to selling tyranny, I think that the economics of asymmetric cryptography and the economics of the information age and the force multiplying effect of the tools that we can use, it's getting increasingly profitable to sell freedom. And also the impact that a single individual can have is tremendous. During the industrial age, the machines that we built, they multiplied the power of our muscles. But in the information age, the tools that we build, they multiply the power of our minds. Imagine if Isaac Newton or Copernicus, 190 IQs, had the ability to multiply the power of their minds and affect everybody in the world with the tools they build. Or Johann von Goethe, 215 IQ, 3 times the working vocabulary of Shakespeare. Think of the impact that they could have on shaping the destiny of everything. And so just like Alan Turing said in The Imitation Game, we get to make the choices because we're the only ones who can do what we do.
Wow, so I definitely agree with those inspiring statements. An interesting thing to look at selling, marketing Bitcoin is that because of the network externality effects and because money goes in cycles, it really pays to market to groups, to sell to groups rather than individuals. So to go back to PayPal's history, PayPal started as a private centralized currency that didn't go anywhere. Then they pivoted to a payment system on Palm Pilots. But since so few people had Palm Pilots, that the chance of like a group getting together for dinner, being able to all pay on their Palm Pilots was really small. So they didn't have the network externality. So what they did is they discovered a community on eBay, group of small businessmen who couldn't get credit card merchant accounts, but they wanted to sell stuff on eBay. So that was discovering a community, discovering a group that you could market to that was a secret to PayPal's success. And I believe also a secret to Bitcoin's success. Because the number one objection to using Bitcoin will be, well, nobody I know uses it or nobody I'm doing business with uses it. And so you have to kind of sell in parallel to overcome those objections in parallel. And one tool that I think is very interesting for that is social networks. So blockchains themselves are back office technology. People don't interact with the blockchain directly. They interact with wallets. Or in the case of change tip bots, for example, they interact with a social network. And so because social network represents that group, I think it's a very powerful way to sell Bitcoin going forward.
Well, that is going to actually wrap up our panel, but I am just so incredibly grateful to you, Dr. Craig, and to you four gentlemen for rallying for me and everything. And it was just great that they asked when I called. And I loved what Craig tweeted earlier. He said, He said, the things I get myself talked into. I said, Nick said the same thing. He said, I do that to you all. So thank you so much for being willing to come, and for Stephen, this opportunity and everything. And I'm really proud to be up here with you guys, and thank you so much. Really, it's great.
Thank you.